Better, yes. Okay, just wanted to make sure this is working. Wanted to welcome you all, of course, to our meeting. Wanted to point out that we are getting ready to make a series of changes. And first, the many changes that you all saw tonight, you have place cards. Beginning with next meeting, if you're an alternate, we're going to move you over to this table. Main members on this table, partly to address some issues that our town attorney brought up with us. I did want to say tonight, it seemed kind of cruel to send Matt off to the corner by himself and put a gag on him. So we just decided probably better to seat everybody around the table. I did send out an email to you all today. I'm assuming you got it. If not, I definitely have the memo that's in it. Our town attorney, who is not with us tonight, he's over in Brevard, I believe it is, having some fun. Sent in an opinion piece to us on June 20th on, at the request of the town manager, on the topic of the UDO and the general statutes as they relate to the requirement that each and every member of the board, primary board, as opposed to alternate board, vote on every single item that's in front of you, chair included. And I did want to point out to you all the rules about conflict of interest. If you're an elected official, appearance of conflict might come into it. In this particular situation, you all could only have a conflict of interest as laid out in General Statute 160D 109 or in 234, excuse me. So basically, you have to have a direct financial benefit, not the appearance of a benefit, not work for somebody. You yourself have to be actually receiving money either before the meeting or as a result of the way the meeting turns out. If that isn't you, then you vote. And that includes Mr. Forrest. I want to be really clear. Now, anyone who fails to vote during a vote is counted in North Carolina as an affirmative vote. This comes in handy in a situation where there's a split vote and, you have a situation where every single vote counts in every single direction. Certainly a person who is not going on record as voting has just voted yes. That's been the case in North Carolina for about 12 years. So let me just be really clear that our UDO also mentions, basically the same language that's in the general statute on conflicts of interest and on voting. So it's going to tell you that for tonight, we're going to sit very nice and cozy this way. In the future, if we were to get in here and discover that someone who is a primary board member is not here, like in the case of tonight with Carl, then the alternate for that situation is who replaces the person. So the in-town would replace in-town, the ETJ would replace an ETJ member. So that's essentially how that works. I did want to point out to you all, in lieu of department updates, I'm just going to go ahead and give them to you now. I came to work today and to my surprise and dismay, there was a sort of persistent rumor going on that we were going to be having the Austin Chapel discussion tonight and that we were going to have the initial Asteria discussion tonight. Both of those are for the 19th of August. I want to be real clear. 19th of August, we'll be discussing those two items. Part of why we need a lot of lead time going into that is that the Austin Chapel neighborhood meetings have been exciting. And it's my suspicion that some of that excitement will make its way into this room. Also, the Asteria is exciting in a whole different way because it is the very first, it's 500 lots. I'm looking at, I think it's 500 lots Asteria. Anyway, it's the very first neighborhood that's being developed as part of the North Village in the section that was bought by the company that is developing Story Living by Disney. So let me say, we've taken a look at the subdivision and we've received an application and it looks remarkably like a whole bunch of houses. So anyway, if you're expecting Mickey Mouse or anything like that, you're going to be slightly disappointed, but I'm super excited that at least the first piece of it is coming through here. And I am super excited that we are going to finally have a meeting about the item that seems to be dominating nearly every meeting we have here, which is the opposition to that particular development. Although I did have a meeting today with someone in favor, so, you know, stranger things have happened. So anyway, at this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our Assistant Planning Director, Teresa Thompson. They do have the packet, right? Yes. Okay, so I was just going to say, you actually have a packet in front of you, and to the left of that packet, there's some blank sheets of paper for notes.
Mr. Director, before we get to Assistant Director Thompson's presentation.
Yes, sir.
Can we please get the packet of August 19th meeting early as possible?
We'll certainly give it a shot.
It's going to be voluminous and we know it's going to be important, and I'd personally like to be well briefed on it. So if you can
Well,
get it into our hands.
The only concern I have is that they just turned in the application for the Austin Chapel. It's been less than 5 days.
I understand.
So the report is not ready.
Sure.
The other one, Asteria, I think that'll be ready in plenty of time. But anyway, yes, we'll do what we can to get it to you. Also, tonight's board or your packet for tonight did not have any minutes in it. We're going to do that next month. All right. So at this point,
Thank you.
Teresa Thompson.
Good evening. So, we're having items tonight. We thought this would be a good opportunity for another training session. We had one a few months ago, but we have new people and look back and listen to some of the questions that were asked. We're gonna try to maybe touch on those a little bit more, reiterate on a few things and answer some questions that you might still have. So we want this to be like interactive, more like a conversation, not as formal as a lot of the types of items that you typically get. And since we do have some new faces, we thought it would be good just to kind of go around the room and introduce yourselves, maybe say one or two things about you would like, just to get to know each other a little better.
Sure. My name's Matt Hayes. I'm the ETJ alternate member. So I'll be over there next week. I've been in Pittsburgh for 10 years this month. It's really like counted girls. Yeah.
Rick Kearney, we live on Small Street, Pittsburgh, downtown. We're still in 1790 Tavern, the oldest building in town. And Eric got me involved in this planning board. So
How long have you been on the board now?
I'm not sure. Came on, I would have been sitting over here. But
I think all in, Ray, about 5 years.
I think it was 2 alternate
Yes.
and
And 3 as a
3 as a
member. Yeah.
member. But
Ray also has an extensive background in construction, so
I taught carpentry and cabinet making,
he brings a lot of expertise in that area.
that type of deal for,
And you're part of the historical?
I used to be.
Oh, okay.
We still remember historical, if they have houses or cemeteries, I work on that, but I resigned from the board.
Oh, okay.
I'm Alfred Austin. I am an in-town member and I have been on this board for up 10 years. I do enjoy it. I, do like to be here in place of the town. I have been retired for 11 years, but you never know it. I work more now I do more now than I did when I was working. And it's been a lot, still do a lot of ball.
You still find time for us to be on this board too.
Huh?
You still find time to be on this board too.
I do. I umpire, coach, referee. I do the whole 9 yards. Still at this age, I still do that.
Christina?
Good evening. My name is Christina Fiard. I'm an alternate member, so I'll be joining you at the kid table. So that'll be fun. A little bit about me. Moved to Pittsburgh in 2017, so just over 7 years ago. I live in Powell Place with my husband and 2 children and dog, and very happy to be here.
I'm Eric Quorum. I've been on the board. Well, I'm now in my 7th year on the board and my 3rd as chair. It's been a privilege to be here through a lot of important decisions. Prior to joining the planning board, I was on the Extra Elements Committee, which was convened to basically write the enhanced standards for the Chatham Park development. And so I've been in a lot of these meetings. I've been in town 12 years. I've rehabbed 3 houses. My wife and I live in the third. We're in the town of Pittsburgh, and happy to be here. Mr. Bill?
I'm William Baker. I've been here 36 years. I moved here from Maryland when Townsend bought the poultry plant. I worked with them for 20-some years. I'm just kind of interested in what's going on in the town and the county.
I'm Corey Forrest, first year on the planning board. I've been in Pittsburgh for 6. I am prior service Marine Corps, very active with the VFW. So if you go to any VFW events, you'll very likely see me there. I live in town with my wife and son, and dog and cat. I think that's all I got.
Okay. Ms. Mize?
I'm Charity Mize. I joined the planning board at the same time as Ray, also as an alternate. So I guess it's been 5 years. My family has the old Bill Thomas house, so we're ETJ, and a little hobby farm out there for kids that I'm home with now.
Also wanted to point out to those who don't know, we have a town board member here, Jay Farrell.
Hey, Jay. Thanks for joining us.
So we're gonna keep this less than an hour. If I keep going and just, gavel or something, or if we're having a bunch of fun and we want to keep going, that's fine too. But yeah, we're gonna try to keep this less than an hour. This does not cover everything that we're gonna talk about tonight. It's just kind of a start. So if you want to hold on to these green folders, we can add on to them. There's also paper on the sides if you want to take notes. Again, interrupt me at any time. We want this to be interactive. And let's see. I think those are all the intro notes that I wanted to make. So I'll share my screen again.
Teresa, while you bring up your PowerPoint, I wanted to say that Paul Messick's memo that was distributed to everyone today probably ought to go into this packet as it evolves as a living document, because it's a very good reference piece, and probably ought to go into the appendix of the handbook you passed out. And I'm sure there are going to be other documents like that that will merit inclusion, because they would help future board members to quickly come up to speed.
We'll bring copies of the memo to the next to add to it.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with just I'm sorry. Oh, yes. So if you want to bring your books to the next meeting,
Sure.
we'll just, give you items to add to them each time. So what is planning? What is community planning? It's basically local governments working with the community, stakeholders, boards, just like the planning board, in trying to help the town board make informed decisions. So not just for today, but for the future. We're not going to go through everything that's on the slide. This is more for y'all. Like, if you want to use for future reference, you can come back and read into more details. So we're just going to kind of skim over it. And like I said, touch on a few things that I noticed there's been some questions on over the past several months. Anyone else want to add anything about what they think planning is? Community planning? Or anything you want to learn more about it at this point? Okay. So where do we plan? We have our town limits. We also have a 3-mile ETJ, extraterritorial jurisdiction outside of that. So every part of that is zoned, and you can't just pick and choose what you want to zone. You have to zone none of it or all of it. We also have a lot of state and federal regulations that we have to go by that help us put plans together. So you've got DOT, DEQ, the Corps of Engineers, FEMA, there's all sorts of regulations that trickle down to what we have to look at.
I have a question. Teresa. Are ETJs common? Does every town have an ETJ?
You have to ask for one, can get. But usually it's about a mile.
Okay.
So yeah, I can't think of any town that doesn't have an ETJ, but it's based on your population size. So with us being under 5,000, we'd actually fall within a 1 mile ETJ typically. But at some point, I can't remember what year, the town of Pittsburgh got special legislation to go to 3 miles. Siler City did the same thing. So there's a few that have, but you can't go beyond 3 miles. That's max in any jurisdiction.
Just a quick one. As Shannon Park and these other developments increase and then get annexed into the town, does it change in size?
You would have to go through a process to expand it. So right now it would not.
It's not automatically. I worked in a couple of places where the town outgrew the ETJ considerably. And very lopsided. It doesn't move. You have to ask the county for permission.
But great questions. So purpose of the board, you're gonna look at mainly when you make a decision, what does the comprehensive plan say, which is mainly there's several comprehensive plans in Pittsburgh, but the big one's the land use plan that just got adopted a couple of years ago. You're gonna facilitate civic engagement. You're gonna recommend policies and development related applications to the town board, zoning, text amendments, for example, and pretty much anything else the town board asks you to do that's planning related. So those are the big items. So we hold public meetings. We want to be a unifier for the community. We want to be a good communicator, ask questions, encourage the citizens to ask questions. Understand that not everyone's always going to be agreeable to what you say, and just realize that's part of what you do, and your opinion and your professional expertise is what matters to be on this board. So things like this, trainings, is great so that you can just become more informed decision makers. And also I wanted to mention that the reason that the planning board reviews items before it goes to the town board and before there's even a public hearing is because this is not supposed to be a political board. So you're not elected officials, you're appointed. So the town board, they have that extra layer of politics that's involved in legislative decisions. This is supposed to be the opposite of that. So y'all are looking at facts and of course your opinions on when you're making or, what you think is a reasonable decision. But trying to keep that in mind when you're deliberating and making decisions that, there could be a crowd of, 50 people upset about something. And sometimes you have to be able to know the difference between, okay, this is a decision we think we should make versus, oh no, we can't make that just because it's going to make somebody upset. Does that make sense? So the types of decisions in Pittsburgh falls under 3 different types. You got administrative, which is town staff. We approve like sign permits, for example. Legislative, which is the town board, that's the policymakers. And then quasi judicial, which is the Board of Adjustments. That's evidentiary based. So I know this was brought up at the last training. Wanted to include a simple table for y'all for reference, more for the future. So unless you have any questions, I won't go through the table in detail right now. Just knowing that you being a part of the key player, one of the key players in planning decisions, you're the advisory board to the town board for typically for legislative items, which is that broad discretionary type of item like a rezoning, a text amendment. You also look at preliminary plats, it gets a little confusing. I go back to the first table, I did want to mention that, because you can see preliminary plat falls under administrative. So legally, the town staff can approve preliminary plats. They don't have to go to the planning board and the town board. Just like in the past, for those that have been here several years, the site plans didn't have to go to y'all either. Eventually, the site plans were given to staff to handle. So with it over the next several months, there might be a request by the town staff to look at maybe doing preliminary plats at a town staff approval level as well. Just because it's all based on facts. There's nothing that you could just say, oh, I don't like about this project and we're going to deny it. And sometimes when you have administrative decisions that go to a board, especially a political board, that can sometimes not be a good combination for things. When they're strictly just looking at what the facts are supposed to be to approve something, and not if they actually like the project or not. So, looking at tools, like I mentioned before, we had the land use plan. And we have the CTP, Comprehensive Transportation Plan, Bike and Pedestrian Plan, Parks and Rec Master Plan. So, these are all ordinances that we should all be looking at and be familiar with when you're making decisions, especially rezoning decisions. We have the code book, Code of Ordinances. That's the town code. The difference between that and the UDO is you can only enforce the Code of Ordinances in city limits. It's what you call more of a police power versus a land use power. And in the UDO, which we just created a couple years ago, it used to consist of like 4 or 5 different freestanding ordinances that we had in Pittsburgh. So like the subdivision ordinance was separate, floodplain was separate, stormwater, watershed. We've combined all that now into the UDO. And as we come back to y'all for these quarterly updates, you'll notice that we're trying to clean up a lot of these issues of just kind of condensing it, making it easier to understand. We also have the standalone zoning districts that come along with their own set of rules, like Chatham Park, which is basically its own UDO in a way. They have the master plan, they have elements, they have the small area plan. So, there's a lot we have to look at depending on what the project is. Or like Powell Place, for example, that was an MEPD, so they have their own rules that we have to look at whenever they want to develop something in Pittsburgh. So it can get really a lot of layers to it. We also contract with Chatham County on sediment and erosion control. So even though that's the county's ordinance, because we have a contract with them, we go by their freestanding ordinance. Any questions on that?
Yeah, Teresa, is there ever a time, so like looking at this comprehensive transportation plan being done in 2011, you guys ever look at that and say, oh, that's kind of, we should look at that and maybe get it done because it's
actually going to get started in the next 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are, and it's going to be a county-wide plan this time.
okay.
Or when Chatham County did the CTP back then, Pittsburgh wanted to be left out for different reasons. So now we're going to try to make it more collaborative, looking at the areas outside of Pittsburgh too, and how that could affect the transportation network inside of Pittsburgh. So we'll be working with DOT and the county on this one.
Thank you.
Question quick. Will that also take into consideration all the side streets within the town of Pittsburgh?
Yes, so the CTP, that's required through DOT. So there is an emphasis on state roads. We do look at side streets as well. I mean, there are non-DOT roads in the CTP. It really just depends on what we put in it. For example, so it just, if there's a certain side street that we say, okay, well, we think we need to consider this possibly being this number of trips per day 10 years from now. And it might need to be, instead of a boulevard, it might need to be a freeway one day. We got to look at that now so that we can start planning for it And what kind of development do you want to see on that side or that, town street now? Because 10, 20 years from now, it might not be a small street. So that answer your question? It just, it depends on what it is.
I guess what my question is, as the major thoroughfares through the town, 64, 15, and so on grow, sometimes it's hard to get off the side streets. So when we look at a transportation, if we're gonna look at that whole goal to that transportation, how are we gonna,
Yes,
how are we gonna get traffic from sides? Sometimes even now, we have to turn right to go left.
Correct.
yes. So DOT is updating their overall model for Pittsburgh, and that does take into account side streets and major roads, where there could be just saying a future bypass,
Parkway, for example.
right? So there's a model, and Chatham Park did their own model as well. So they did that to look at the North and South Village. And it was selective trips per day in Pittsburgh, not just on the major thoroughfares. So that is taken into account.
Thank you.
DOT. And that's part of the reason why it takes so long too, because the model it's very intensive and expensive, and only certain software can do it. And so they're not going to do it all the time, obviously, maybe once every 10 years. So, but we've been asking for, at least 4 years for them to help us with the CTP. So it's finally getting started. The basic process for us, and I say legislative, but not everything is legislative, like clearing plots, for example. But typically, what we do is we have a scoping meeting with just staff. So we talk to someone in the community about an idea they have. They might want to open a business, and we say, okay, well, you're gonna have to rezone. That could be a deal breaker for them sometimes. Then if they want to keep moving forward, then we meet with all the staff. So the engineers, DOT, we all get together, talk about it holistically and the logistics of it. And then if they still want to move forward, they have their community meeting, submit their application, let's say for a rezoning, they have to rezone the property for a business, and goes to y'all and then the town board. So those are the basic steps.
I have a question. And it might be just because this is my second meeting, but in terms of the power of this advisory board, is the power in making in helping the development meet certain criteria or make it more palatable to the community? Or is the power in actually being able to deny something that meets all of the
UDO, Unified Development Ones. And we'll get into that a little bit, but just to briefly answer the question. Well, one, you don't make the decision, you make a recommend, right.
Right.
So, but beyond that, you have the discretion to say what you think the concerns are for a particular request, especially when it comes to conditional rezones.
Right.
We'll get into that in a minute too, but depending, and it can be anything, not specific to something that's in the UDO. It could be something completely different that you think of, and then you say, okay, we recommend that you take into account X, Y, and Z, the driveway should be here, or we think this requires an additional buffer, and those are simple things, but it can be a lot more complicated.
I'm just gonna throw in, ultimately, this board does not have power to stop the project, it's trends.
Right.
Give an advisory opinion, and the public is one of many considerations, but there's no such thing as something that stops this.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm wondering is how to and this might not be the right form for the question, but how to harness the power inherent in the advisement, right? In the advising. How is that used in a way that is beneficial? I guess, and that might be more of a philosophical question later, but just to.
So we'll get into this a little bit, but you have your options for when you approve or deny or recommend denying something. you can approve with recommendations for conditions and once in a while, we don't advocate doing this all the time, but if you do need more time to think about something and, you could table and have them come back with more information. And then everything that is discussed at this level, we take to the town board and we tell them what your concerns were with the project and why you recommended approval or modifications or anything like that. So they get all the information to help them make an informed decision. Did that answer your question, I hope?
It did.
Okay. Sorry.
When it comes to us, is it guaranteed that it meets everything within the UDO?
Yes, sir. If it comes to you, then staff has already reviewed it. If there's something like a conditional rezoning that a applicant is asking a variation for, like, let's say the setback is 10 feet and they want it to be 8 feet. We would put that in our staff analysis and say, these are the requested variations that the applicant is requesting. They can only do that through a conditional rezoning though. So, general use rezonings, you can't change anything in the UDO. But no, we review everything ahead of time.
So the only thing we would actually review would be the gray areas around the UDO, but not the UDO itself.
Unless you have,
But versus 10 foot.
right, if you have concerns about something that's in the UDO, you can ask questions and bring that up as well. This is the forum for that. Because we take what you say to us and we do research and we come back and we say, okay, maybe we need to change something. And if it is a conditional rezoning and you want to bring up setbacks or anything like that, it might lead to modifying the application. So it's still good to speak your mind, ask questions, and what concerns you have.
Are there situations where things are kind of leapfrog the planning board and go right to the commissioners for planning related items? Or maybe things that we've tabled or things that we've.
No,
Well, actually, I was gonna say, there is one situation. If you were to withhold an opinion for 30 days beyond the presentation of an idea that's going up for rezoning, then automatically the board outside of yours.
yeah, it's like,
You've got 1 month. That's it.
okay.
Good.
Yeah, besides that,
I mean,
like if you wanted to sit on something and just not decide, then we would take it to the board. But we wouldn't skip y'all, is what I meant. Like, we wouldn't the only thing that doesn't go to you guys, that does go to the town board, are special use permits. And that falls under quasi, which really that would typically be Board of Adjustments, but here it's a little different, but yeah, that doesn't go to y'all because that's completely evidence-based. So they don't need an advisory board to look at it because it's just one board that says, okay, these are the facts for the case and we're going to make the decision based on that. So like we said, approve, and that should say recommend, by the way. For table. And going through the legislative process, answering some of the question like you had earlier, a little more detail. When y'all are making a decision, basically, legally, it just arbitrary. So out of every rezoning case, and I could be wrong, maybe Randy can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's ever been any rezoning case overturned in North Carolina unless it was an illegal spot zoning. So like, just because an applicant's not happy with jurisdiction's decision on a rezoning, they think it should have been approved, and let's say it got denied, that's never been overturned in North Carolina. So long as you have a reason for it, it should be fine. And we'll, if it's something based on like, you think the applicant's ugly, or we'll let you know that doesn't count, but anything that you have a good reason for, it's pretty broad. That's why it's discretionary. You also want to look at the comprehensive plans, like I mentioned, and staff does that as well. So where it says UDO section 1.5, The UDO actually requires staff to make sure that every request follows all of our comprehensive plans. And the definition of comprehensive plan in the UDO includes all of them. So we're not just looking at the land use plan, we're already doing that. But of course, if you guys ever have questions about any of our plans, just let us know. You also want to look at, not saying these are, you have to. If you're gonna, let's say, someone wants to rezone to residential and it abuts a commercial zoning district, doesn't mean you have to deny it. These are things just to think about. But you want to think about zoning district compatibility. So if it's, a big commercial, or let's say big residential area or big commercial area, and someone wants to do something right in the middle that is not consistent with that at all, that's something to question. And possibly deny. Same thing with surrounding land uses. So if you have, a huge residential neighborhood, a bunch of single family homes, and there's an open lot and someone wants to rezone it and put a little, I don't know, manufacturing plant or something like that. That would probably be something you would say that, I don't think that fits the character of the area. Like I said before, there's the reasonableness. So that's required by law. The staff has to put that in our consistency statement anyways. We have to explain why it's reasonable. There's lots of different ways that you can look at it if you think it's reasonable or not. And spot zoning, like I mentioned before, spot zoning itself is not illegal. It's if it meets certain, if it triggers certain issues. So the first is it comes down to the size more than anything. So if you've got a huge residential area and someone wants to put like a little 1 acre commercial district that doesn't serve any purpose for the community, that could be considered spot zoning. If it's something large that's going to affect and benefit the whole community and change the layout in that regard, then that could be something that you would say, okay, that's gonna help the community. So typically, when you're looking at spot zoning issues, the bigger the property, the better. It's also, are you benefiting just one person or are you benefiting like the community? So if one person comes in and says, I want to do this because of this, it's like, okay, well, how is that going to help Pittsboro? So that's something to think about as well.
Teresa, I have a question. If an applicant, if their request is not consistent with the comprehensive plans, does staff have the ability to stop their application process? Or they get to decide whether to continue with the request?
Yeah, we will let you know, in our opinion at least, if it meets the land use plan. And if it doesn't meet the land use plan, you can still recommend approval. We would be required by law to then update the land use plan.
Oh, interesting.
To meet it. And that's one of those new 160D rules that came into effect. Like you actually have to update the plan to say, okay, well, this person is asking for this area, this lot to be commercial, but the land use plan shows it to be residential. We have to go in and find where that tract of land is and change the future land use classification area to commercial.
Interesting. And
So that's something important to think about, like the effects that it makes over time.
And at that time, would y'all consider like changing the land use plan for the surrounding areas as well?
The stormwater plans that over here, project was in opposition to the land use plan. It did get approved. And at the time, because it switches the map, it just switches that particular parcel on the map. So the request from the board was to fan out a larger area and go ahead and change that whole area and make it more homogeneous. But yeah.
That's exactly the case I was thinking.
Let's see here.
And that has affected the surrounding areas.
Well, it was a tree coverage area. It's not zoned for that. And at the same time, but if you approve something that violates your plan, it changes the map.
So, yeah, everything I'm bringing up.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Randy, is that the one out on 64 West?
Right over there, we literally.
That's the one that we declined because it didn't meet the land use plan. And I believe it went to the board of supervisors and
Got approved.
how come we didn't hear back on it? Is,
What would you have heard back?
would it just been nice if we'd have known that that it's being changed and why it was being changed? Because it's been a good educational tool at the time.
If you have a case in the future where it clearly violates the plan and you're concerned about the outcome, the assumption would be that you came to the board of commissioners meeting like the hearing happened. Because it was a public hearing, it's on YouTube and Facebook Live or whatever. So I mean, it's available, it's not like secret information. And obviously, when we change the land use plan, we bring in that change here.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying, that it comes with a change, we could use that as an example for a change.
are you like asking that we give you updates on how items get approved or denied at the commissioners?
I read about it, did I read the minutes of the board of supervisors? I'll go through the minutes to see if there's anything that I think it's interesting and pertains. And I read the minutes, but I think it would be good for the board to know the reason why it was changed. So the next time something comes up with that same scenario,
Right,
with that same method,
I think that was a really poor example of what I would call an ordinary change. In this particular case, this guy had an extraordinary request. It was based on a very, very long amount of time that that property had been used in a non-conforming way. It has not conformed with the zoning since the zoning category was assigned to it many, many years ago. So, you know, you're sitting in a place that apparently is supposed to be a residential neighborhood, it's supposed to be tree covered and quite low density. And yet when you pull up in there, it's an engineering firm and a building where they've literally cleared cut all the land. So the request to reforest that seemed quite bizarre. And then, of course, the whole idea that, you know, it was non-conforming to start. I mean, it's been non-conforming for a period of more than 5 years. So, not such a great example, but if we were to, for an example, something that might come back to you all that would be huge would be, if we had an area, well, we have one of those, as a matter of fact. I was gonna say the Robinson's Walk, is a great example of that. That entire area is zoned, M2, which is our heaviest industrial. Very obviously, it's not gonna be industrial, it's gonna be a city park. And it's going to be largely residential. The reason why that is appropriate, but at the same time, I don't
Randy,
know.
you wanna come up?
Oh, I can do that. The reason why I wouldn't necessarily bring that up to you all necessarily is that very obviously, the decision to make it, don't go far. Okay. I was saying, you're not being run away, she's being banished. But let me just say, in that particular case, it sort of puts me in mind of a situation that I had at my last job, but the one prior to that. We had a place that for 27 years, they had predicted that a very large retail discount store that starts with a W and has sort of a star was going to go there. Well, company officials came 16 times and just declared it no chance at all. And they built a store about 4 miles down the road. When I came to work there as a planning director, I was looking at a plan that was developed in 1993, and it's still called for a Walmart there. So we had someone come in with an affordable housing project. And so our land use plan had been written with the idea in mind that the folks from Arkansas were going to come and do their thing, and they never did. So staff's job was to come in and argue for why, if you looked at it from the air, if you looked at development projects and you looked at a pattern of development, it very clearly was never going to be a Walmart. However, it was at the convergence of I-95 and I-42, two major highways, and there were major employers close by where there was not enough affordable housing. So in that particular case, the developer came forward with his request The planning board was equally divided between the, oh my gosh, we've been talking about this since 1992. What do I have to do? Put a Walmart sign out in front of the place? Well, that would have been helpful. It just hadn't happened and they were not interested. And their lack of interest was demonstrated by the fact that exactly 1 mile over on the next major highway, which was 301, there was a Walmart Supercenter and a tire center. So clearly they were never coming to that site. So short of the fact that they had renamed it from Industrial Drive to a commercial name that indicated the businesses that were on it, I'd say that the board, at least in part, had given up on the industrial part of it, or the, in this case, the retail. But the housing project that was built, and when I say housing project, I mean a development, not a housing project. But the development that's been built is quite beautiful. I was in it last week. But the point is, in that particular case, you wouldn't have had to come back to the planning board with that story, because the entire town was abuzz with the fact that finally, after 20 years, that particular towel had been thrown in and a natural use of the land was possible. So if we had a place, as I feel Robertson's Creek, Robertson's Walk is, where it clearly was never going to be manufacturing, I think that it's noteworthy. And I certainly hope that project does go through, and I'd like to see it built. But I think land uses change over time. And so I don't think the first people who ever came up with a sign map for community are right eternally. I think that situations change.
There's somebody that polices that part of it where today they decided this is what they were gonna build. They came to the board, things was changed. 15 years down the road, nothing's ever been done. Don't we have somebody that actually knows how to police that, or?
Well, actually, we have a provision that's in our conditional zonings that states that after a period expires, the town can elect to go back and rezone it or reclassify it. It doesn't revert on its own. That wouldn't be lawful. That would violate the state constitution. But what can happen and what will happen. It's not like she's gone on vacation, but what I was just gonna say is, in the case of most of the rezonings, if you look at the top, there's sort of a notation where certainly the one across the street says that 5 years after water and sewer available, if they haven't hit a lick, then the town staff could voluntarily go back and say.
How often would the town, I know it's been that it's theirs already been rezoned and but how often would the town decide to make that move to decide, okay, it's been 5 years and I know we got other things just booming and we got things booming and booming and booming and booming. Do you have time to go back and see, oh, shoot, they still haven't touched anything?
Oh, we have plenty of time for that. We have plenty of time for that. That's my job.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So it was really interesting. I was not aware that if something is approved and stuff that's in conflict, but land use plan or UDO and stuff, have to go and update that. Is that true with not just zoning, but like we approve something, but the terms that they use are very different than the terms that we use. Like they said, one of the ones that was approved last time, they said 50% will be affordable housing or low income housing, but they define low income as 80% of the median income and then 100% of the median income, which doesn't seem low income, that seems the income. So does that mean, because we heard that, based upon those conditions, do we have to redefine what we consider low income at 100% of the median income?
Yeah. Let Teresa jump in anytime she wants to. This can be a shared microphone. Come on, I don't bite. But yeah, but anyway, what I was going to say is that actually our median income here is lower than the metropolitan statistical area that we're actually. So actually,
we defined it very differently when you guys educated us on it.
Well, what I was going to say in that particular case is it's also a moving target in the sense that income rises and lowers. I'm going to say that there's difficulty in trying to get somebody to take a project that ordinarily is incredibly expensive to live in and suddenly just voluntarily throw themselves on a sword and figure out a way to make the house $200,000 when everything in the neighborhood is $650.
Mhm.
So there's an affordability issue in that. The other piece of it is I'd rather have some of something than none of anything.
I agree. I'm just saying, but we're not obligated to redefine our thing. If we've recognized that as that's what they're calling low income, and we approved it based upon that provision,
Affordable, not low income.
it's affordable.
Affordable. The idea is that you're not supposed to be spending more than 30% of your pre-tax
Right.
income on housing. I saw a statistic yesterday in the News and Observer that in the Triangle area, and the Triangle area now extends to this area, most people are spending somewhere between 43 and 56% of their housing, of their income housing at all. And the average down payment on one of those houses is around $100,000. So the question is, do you have $100,000 on? Yes.
It'd also be good to explain low income.
Yeah, no, this is that. Yes.
That's a great.
Yes. Very, very different. Very, very different. Low income, of course, would be more or less in the Section 8 sort of category. The idea that you're eligible for some set of government benefits, and one of those could be assistance in housing.
Mhm.
Affordable is supposed to be people who are some portion of the median household income here. So you would be a household of two,
Mhm.
making somewhere in that 38 to 65 category. And again, if you've got your eyes on a $500,000 house, you're having to find a way to get yourself into a $500,000 or $600,000 house with that down payment.
You guys did a really good job explaining that to us months ago, like
Yes.
the formula.
Hasn't changed.
Well, it's, yeah, okay.
Hasn't changed.
Their term of affordable, but yeah,
Well, in a conditional zoning, each person gets to write their own definition.
okay,
I'm sorry, maybe that would have been more.
sure.
But it's like just 25 minutes, but anyway, thank you.
That's crazy.
Typically, you have workforce housing as well,
Yes.
which is, usually 80 to 100%.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, I think really the question was, are we making sure that the criteria that applicants are using say that our requirements are the same criteria that we're using?
Well,
That's not. We have recommendations. You cannot require anybody to make housing. North Carolina law.
Well,
You define, you say the word affordable, yeah.
I'm just saying for any criteria we're using to say this number is for this or this number for that, beyond housing, that was,
yeah, so
I gathered that.
before, we were looking at every project as a standalone project. And what could they do based on their calculations of, what are they proposing? How many single family, how many multifamily? And can they make, 5%
Right.
affordable housing versus
It has to be feasible for them.
7. So up until now, we've really just been kind of working with each project individually on what they can do. We recently approved the text amendment to try and promote that 70% AMI average, the aggregate total of 70%, so that you can get those incentives to have like a 50% decrease in your lot size, for example. So by putting that in the UDO, we're letting developers know upfront that we'd at least like to start that conversation at 70% AMI. And we would like to see at least 10% of the units be affordable housing as well.
Okay.
So we just did that at the last meeting, so.
But
Last,
yeah.
sorry, quick question about the changing of zoning that you did for I know it wasn't the best example for what you said, but yeah. If the law now says you must change the zoning afterwards to reflect
No, you don't have to do.
I'm sorry. So essentially, if you vote against your own land use plan, at that moment, while we're sitting in the Board of Commissioners meeting and the gavel goes down, the map, even though you can't see it while we're sitting there, is now changed.
For just that,
For that one parcel.
just one, okay. I wasn't sure if it was, it changed, if it needs to change it for all the land use. Just the parcel.
One parcel and actually changes none of the text. It's just the map. Just the map. Now, the confusion, when the legislature passed that law first, they left it sort of hanging out there because we were kind of wondering, okay, what happens if, I mean, we know what happens if it doesn't match the plan and you vote it down, you, the Board of Commissioners, vote it down. And we knew what happened if they both matched. What we weren't sure was what exactly happened if they didn't match. And they said, oh, it changes your land use plan. Well, your land use plan is a document with words. It's also a map. So they came back the next year and said, well, what you really meant was just that parcel on just that map.
Got
Okay, is that helpful?
Very helpful. Thank
All
you.
right, I'm sorry. She's got the floor. We're tagging. How about that?
I just wanted to clarify too, you're talking about the land use plan map, not the zoning map.
Correct.
I hope so.
Okay, so there's two different maps. You know, we have the town zoning map. That's what it's currently zoned. And then you have your future land use plan map.
Mhm.
So, you know, if we approve a rezoning that doesn't meet the future land use plan map, we have to change that. Doesn't mean we have to go in automatically and change all, you know, the zoning map to reflect all the changes except for that one property that got rezoned. That makes sense. Okay. When you said map, I just want to make sure I understood which one you were talking about.
I just wanted to make sure I understood implications of change of approving something outside of the land use.
Yeah, there can be significant changes in the future because when you rezone one piece, it's more likely that another piece could be rezoned similar to that. So yeah, changes that y'all recommend today could have effects hundreds of years from now, especially, you know, subdivisions and larger projects with road networks. And so, let's see, what time is it?
Now, when somebody comes in and they have a project that clearly doesn't match the map, that is, I'd say in the scoping meeting, that's probably one of the first grade. You've been around all the different meetings yet, have you? Meetings, yeah.
Well, I mentioned the scope. Yeah, I mentioned that.
Well, I'm just gonna say, okay, if Charity were coming in and her plan completely blows a hole in the land use map, a future one, we're gonna tell you that. Then we're gonna tell you for your application meeting.
Mhm.
Then we're gonna tell you while we're warming you up for this meeting. We're also gonna tell you in front of a crowd at this meeting that your plan doesn't match. No one has ever been through the process, was not aware of what was happening. They're very aware.
They just to go.
I beg your pardon?
They just continued to go ahead, was not there.
But they're actually sort of the buck stops of the Board of Commissioners because they can say, I like my map. I was right. I like my map. I adopted my map. I stand by my map. I love this map. They also have the right to say, I hate this map. I didn't really agree with it this part. I didn't really understand it. It made sense at the time. It doesn't anymore. So it's a judgment call at the last minute for them. But I think there's a misconception that somebody would make it all in this board and not have their plans terrible. Because we start that conversation, I think right after hello. Hi, it doesn't match that at all. What makes you feel this might work?
Upright.
Similar to something near it. We do have that conversation a lot.
So, since we're getting real close to that hour, I'm gonna finish this next slide or two. I think the rest of them, if y'all wanna take some time and look over it and just reach out to Randy or one of us. If you'd like us to do something like this and dig in a little more at a future meeting. I'm just looking through to see if there's anything else besides what I just finished up that we want. Well, yeah, let me do that first. I'll ask y'all any questions you have, and then we'll take it from there, because I don't want to keep you guys too late. But back on the spot zoning, so land use plan compatibility, you always want to look at that. And how consistent the proposed uses to what the existing area is. So if you're going from, let's say, a single family like, let's say the zoning district is currently single-family residential, and you want to rezone it to multifamily. That's similar, that's still residential. If you want to go from single-family to heavy industrial, that's huge, that's a big, big difference. Not saying you can't recommend approving it, but it's just something to keep in mind that could be looked at as spot zoning. So everything that, we just went over, if it checks all those boxes, there's a good chance we'll be talking to the town attorney and making sure we make a good decision. And then with general use rezonings, you always want to keep in mind that when someone rezones from one district to another, they might say, oh yeah, I'm going to put in a veterinarian's office. They get it rezoned and then it could be a restaurant. So you have to look at every use that's allowed in that zoning district. You can't tie them to one use. You can only do that through conditional rezoning. And then with conditional rezonings, you want to think about how it's going to affect the area, surrounding area. If you want there to be additional conditions. So if it's like the mini storage warehouse on the east side, some of y'all were here when that got rezoned. There was a lot of homes in that area, so the board said, we think you need to like triple the buffer size. It's only, you're only required to, let's say, have 20 feet. We think it needs to be 60 feet. And we also think that you should not clear cut your existing vegetation. That needs to stay. So those rules are not in the UDO, but the boards thought that in order to approve it, we want y'all to be able to do this because that's what's better for the community. Okay, so do everything that we just said and we'll stay out of court. Any questions on what we talked about? Any more detail? Okay. So, conflicts of interest, rules of procedures, open meeting laws. So I did want to mention with number 15, there was some questions about this at the last training through UNC. You can talk to anybody you want to talk to in the community. So you just can't have a majority of y'all together when you do it. And you definitely don't want to get on some sort of group chat with the majority of you guys talking about. And if you do go around talking to people, you don't want to say things like, oh yeah, we're going to deny that. Like, don't you worry. That'll get it overturned in court. So you can't have like a predisposed opinion on something before you even hear about it. So I did want to make sure we understood that. Okay. So again, just look over everything and we can go over in more detail as needed in the future.
Thank you.
With that, you can move.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Mr. Director, do you have any further departmental updates?
Not really. Like I said, we're going to have a super exciting meeting next month, I believe. I think that each project has its own flavor. Each one has its own flavor. I want to warn you all not to get too excited about the Disney project because we're not going to see a lot. They do have one very interesting from a planning standpoint. They have a parking situation there bringing in that I've never seen before, so I can't wait to see it. And I hate to spoil the surprise, but I'm expecting a lot of explanation as to how it works because it's quite interesting. The other project, I think you all have heard a great deal about it. I'm going to say in terms of advice to this board, when you move closer to the microphone in case my voice decides to start doing what it does all the time. When you end up an unruly mob of visitors, and they have some very strong opinions and they would really, really like to share them. Public comment really works best when the chair uses the gavel to enforce a couple of rules. One has to do with the length of time a person can speak. You're not here to have an interactive conversation with them. They've come to share a concern with you during a business meeting. And so that's one of the sort of misnomers in that particular case. The other thing is, if 12 people get up and they all have the exact same story, I don't like it, it's gonna ruin my neighborhood, the traffic, down every tree, blah, 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 blah. What normally happens is you ask groups to have a spokesperson and know each person from the group who joins into this group does not share their 3 minutes with all their friends, so they don't be getting 45 minutes to talk about it. It's the same three, just keeps you from having to sit through a lot of repetitious nonsense. It's just the same thing over and over. Is that a public hearing in another part of the state, kind of where you can hear the ocean? But it's in the northeast part of the state, and the public hearing portion where people from the public were just speaking before we got around to business lasted 5.5 hours.
Oh, God.
Nobody had anything to say after 25 minutes that anybody there had never heard before, unless it was, this building is on fire. Otherwise, we'd all heard it to death. Got it. You hate wind energy. I heard you. So, so it was that kind of hearing. You know, I don't want one of those things near my house that makes noise. An antenna, because I don't want cell phone service where I live. That was very common in the beginning. Now we're all begging for it to get here fast as they can. But let me just say, non-repetitious is important. The people who come will present you with what they want to talk about. That's exactly what they're going to do, is talk about what they want to talk about. I'm going to say that one of the things that you all should never be shy about, and I'm looking to my staff for some happy faces maybe, is if you are super confused about what they're presenting, please remember this is a dress rehearsal for going to see the elected board. And they're going to have to give a presentation that explains what they're doing or proposing to do. They have to give you a reasonable reason why they want to do it. And they have to be able to answer a series of simple questions from you all. You all are citizen representatives of this community, and you have a responsibility to ask the probing questions. They don't have time for the Board of Commissioners meeting. They have all the time in the world. You have to know why this iron smelter needs to be here instead of there, or what makes you think people aren't going to have a car wreck when there's this much traffic introduced to a street. You can certainly ask that question, and you should. Yes.
Can you limit the total amount of time on public register?
Yes, you can. You can even just decide after 5 minutes, I've heard enough of this for the night. We've got a long agenda. We can move on. The public comment period is an opportunity to be heard, is not an opportunity to sit there and talk all night. So it's a weird balance.
Is that up to the chair to,
Yes, it is.
we've heard enough of this?
Well, I think we've gone in with the notion of a sign-up sheet, which I think
Yeah.
Jenna has handled. And we had one tonight, and when those people sign up, they understand that there's a 5-minute cap on their remarks, and after 5 minutes, and I'll bring a stopwatch next week, the gavel will come down.
And should. And
53rd person that wants 5 minutes.
Or-
And you limit the number of people that
Sure.
should take 5 minutes.
yes,
But, I think after we've heard 3 people in a row stand up and say the same thing, it's move on to another topic.
travel time.
So what do you say? I mean, how do you manage that and stuff? So I mean, in some ways you can anticipate what people are going to be talking about.
Yes.
But in some ways you can't, right? So at some point after the third time you say, does anyone else have anything to say about the water quality effect of this? And then everyone raise your hand and say, okay, you're one group. Pick a speaker.
Yeah, you can go outside in the lobby.
Okay, if you-
Spend a minute having a talk. If we were to come in here and we had 3 pages of people signed up to comment,
Mhm.
it's entirely possible that someone from my staff or myself or the chair, good gracious, don't let me leave you out, can certainly say, we have 27 people listed here who want to speak. I need to know if there's any possibility that any of you all will be having similar issues. It would be great if you could narrow it down, because we really have about a 2-hour time.
Well, I think since we've got 2 biggies next month, at the time they sign up, we could just offer them a binary choice. Do you want to speak about this issue or that issue?
The other thing that people can do is they can always email in a public comment.
Mhm.
We don't have to read it into the record, but we can present it in the packet, and that often takes care of that too. Yes, sir.
Oh, no, nothing. I was just babysitter.
Yeah, these are public comments. These are not public hearings prior to the
Right.
action of the town board. And we're just here to hear the sentiment of our fellow citizens and be a filter and pass it along to the judicial side of things, the legislative side of things.
And the biggest thing that you all can, I think you were talking earlier about power. I think the biggest power of this particular board is the ability to get the citizens' perspective. I mean, we got staff and we talk among ourselves and it gets pretty nerdy at times. As best we try to keep it nerdy. But we're trying to stay on that end of it. But if you don't live next door to the problem, or you don't have a neighbor who lives next door to the problem, or you don't have a cousin who lives near the problem, if you haven't had the same problem in another place, then you all bring a unique perspective and the ability you have to speak to this where one of us may not is that you live here. And it's going to affect you well after the time that I leave. Some year in the future, don't look worried. But, people do retire, people come and go quickly. So the point is, obviously the decisions that that we help shape and the ones that you all send up do affect the community and they affect it long term.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Board comments. Anyone care to bring anything up at the moment that hasn't been discussed? Then we'll entertain a motion to
Movie adjourned.
all in favor? Stand adjourned.